Welcome back, part 2. 66 Mustang electric power steering install. Well, I've done a bit of test fitting under the dash, and the instructions said you probably would need to put this motor like at 11 o'clock in relations to the bottom of the dash. So we have a slot right here, and I think the slot in the original steering column cradle will fit in there. I may have to trim it down a little bit. It'd be too tall, but done a test fit, and I think we're okay as far as the motor clearing. I did have to take the vent bracket loose, and I think I can get it back on once I put the motor in. So we've got a little more prepping to do on the motor assembly, and then we'll bring it back over here and see if it'll fit. Well, I decided to take out the instrument cluster. It plugs in. I have the IntelliTronics. In fact, there's a video on it if you want to check that out on how when I installed it. The main reason I removed it, I got to rewire steering column. We have that ready. I've hooked it up in the car, hooked the battery back up, and everything's working. Signals, parking lights, brake light, horn, everything's good to go. So our next step is to mount this bearing plate on the firewall. And looking at these directions, this bearing mounts on the inside. Turn the flange toward the steering column, this flange here. That way you can tighten up these set screws once you have it, the shaft through there, and you have it in the car. And you leave these nuts loose to where you can move the bearing around if you need to. So we should have 3 holes in the firewall that will line up with those 3 holes. Let's see if we can get this put in. Well, about 15 minutes later, we got the bearing plate in. Now I'm gonna put the coupling on the gearbox and hook the shaft through that bearing and see how it lines up in here. Well, I had a little issue with the D shaft. This larger one, it goes through that bearing on the firewall and then down into the coupling on the gearbox. And it was so tight it would not slide through the bearing easily. So, took this abrasive wheel just on the grinder, put that abrasive wheel on, cleaned it up, and now it slides through there really easy. So that makes it a lot simpler, because you got to feed this through the bearing and into that coupling down there. So hopefully this will go on easy this time. Let's see. And one more thing I done. Probably wasn't necessary, but you see I've drilled a little indent in the end of the shaft, and that set screw will tighten down into that indent. Just makes me feel a little better about this thing being tight. All right, now our shaft is moving easy. Okay, we're connected. I haven't tightened up the set screws and the lock nuts, but the shaft is in there. I think I'll go ahead and tighten the 2 that are on top there on each end of the universal joint. That'll keep that shaft that we had to feed the motor assembly on, keep it tight where it won't be moving on us. And that looks like that's at the right angle, coming up from the gearbox to the column. Now, once I get the column mounted, I will go back and tighten up those 3 nuts on the bearing flange. Then there's a couple of set screws on the outer part of the bearing that I'll tighten down against the shaft. So I think we're ready for the steering column. All right, we have our universal joint mounted on the bottom of the motor. And this has 2 set screws that go into a half moon on the shaft. And then the small shaft goes in here. And we've got a good fit there, and I haven't done anything to this shaft. Finally got it mounted. I tell you, this thing, it weighs probably, I think it said 48 pounds. It's quite a handful to hold up and get the two nuts on that bracket right there. But we got it in, and the shaft looks good. Looks straight. Going down to the gearbox. I've tightened up all the set screws on the coupling there. I just need to tighten up those 7/16 nuts, 7/16 head nuts on that flange. We'll get them all tightened down. That'll hold the bearing where it's supposed to be. All right, I need to put this bracket for the vent control back and emergency brake bracket. It was over here, and because the motor's in the way, we'll have to put it in that hole right there. But it will work. It'll give us just enough clearance. And we'll put the vent bracket on the same one. And that worked okay. We just got 1 bolt in it now, but it works okay. Brake works okay. Figure out where we can put the control module and get this wired up. And there's our control box mounted. We had to go behind the defroster duct, and there's still room behind it, so we'll put that back on when we're finished wiring. So now we need to run that hot wire to the battery, then the smaller 12-volt wire that goes to a 12-volt run. So we'll get them hooked up. Well, can you see it back in there? You can see the label maybe. That worked out great right in behind the defroster ducts. And we have everything wired. Mounting the potentiometer, put it right there, that hole. And I've cut the shaft off to where the knob won't stick down, be in the way. All right, there's the knob. I could cut it off a little bit more. I think I will, where the knob will be up close to the dash as I can get it. All right, that's better. Once I start driving the car, I can tell what position I want this in. Here's my 12-volt hookup on the main 12-volt line. Runs right straight to the battery. And I did put a circuit breaker. Probably wasn't necessary, but makes me feel a little better. And if something happens to the power steering unit, that breaker will trip. So let's connect the battery and see if this thing works. Got the lift down, still have the arms under it, but the tires are on the floor. So we'll give it a good workout here and see what happens. Now when you turn the key on, you hear a click, and that's a control box. So we should be ready to try it. And this is with just a center hub here on the steering, no steering wheel. I think it's definitely working. I'm going to turn it off. Now I can't turn them at all with it turned off, so it's working. Button the rest of this up. Get our instrument cluster back in. Radio console, ashtray, and the seat. And I still have to put the steering wheel on. Let's get this protective paper off of here. we'll put our tilt lever in. Just double checking a few things before we put the instrument cluster and the seat and the steering wheel back on. Made sure the set screws on that bearing collar were tight, as well as the coupling. Just confirmed that everything's snug. I think we've done a good job of clocking the steering column, because if you look, we got a straight shot there with the dash. So I think we got it right where we need it. We'll put the instrument cluster in. We'll do that before we put the steering wheel on. It's easier. And then we'll put the seat in, and then we can use the seat while we're putting the steering wheel on. All right. Instrument cluster still works.
Success.
Radio works. I do have a radio, an FM 8-track. I just use the FM portion. That's a Bluetooth transmitter that I have plugged in right there.
Bluetooth connection success.
Before we put the seat back in, I'm going to get the vacuum. Be a good chance to vacuum under the seat and the rest of the carpet where I've been working. All right, we got the seat put in position, so let's raise the car back up and put the nuts on the bottom of the seat. Before we put the steering wheel on, we need to make sure that the front tires are pointing in the right direction. Looks like we need to go a little bit that way. So let's turn our power steering on and see how easy that will be to do. That's amazing. Just a little bit of pressure. Each tire should be slightly towed in. Yeah, it looks like it is. So we're gonna leave it right there and put the steering wheel on. Ready for a power steering test. We're completely off the lift, so all the weight of the car is on the floor. We heard her click. Pretty nice. And I have the control turned all the way clockwise, so I think that's the most assist. Okay, all the way down apparently is off. So I'm counterclockwise on the control, and I did not hear a click, and I don't have power steering. So let's turn the control. There, we heard her click. And that's not quite as much as we had with it turned fully clockwise. Yeah, clockwise is full power, and as you turn it back counterclockwise, that's less assist. So if you're out on a highway, you didn't need a lot. And it takes a few seconds. I turned it all the way counterclockwise, which is off. It was still working, but now it's quit, so that eventually turns it off. The only problem I've thought of, I might need to move this control, because you have to lean over and turn it. And if you're out on the highway, that probably wouldn't be a good idea. So I'm wondering if I wouldn't have room right here next to the digital dash control button. Moved it right here. More convenient when you're driving if you need to make an adjustment. So, and you can see the little white marker. So once I get used to it, I can pretty much know where that white marker should be when I'm driving or when I'm parking. All right, let's try it one more time. So all the way to the left, counterclockwise, should be off. And we heard no click, so it is. If we turn it, we heard the click. That is, that's about mid-range right there. Pretty nice. And if we were parking, we can turn it all the way up, which would be there. And it's really easy then. We're going to go on a test drive. A couple of reasons. Of course, I want to check out the new power steering, make sure it feels okay, reacts okay. But also I want to make sure my steering wheel's centered. But we'll know when we get out on the highway where our steering wheel sets as we're going down a straight highway. Well, we're driving okay, but our steering wheel is way off center, as you can see. We're going straight, so we need to bring it around this way more. It's working fine. I think on the highway you run it about half on the potentiometer, the half setting. So we're going to pull back in the garage and work on this steering wheel, see if we can get it straightened up. All right, I pulled in as straight as I could, pulling back in the garage. And here's where the steering wheel is setting, so you can see we need to bring it on around to the left quite a bit. I think we got it now. That's setting straight. One more test drive down the road just to see that our steering wheel is setting straight across. Pretty straight stretch of the road here, and that's where we want it. And there's a final look at the steering box with the universal shaft. There's a D shaft going through that bearing in the firewall. So I've checked everything and it's tight. Checked the set screws under the dash. They're tight. So I think we're good to go. I'm going to touch up those two nuts and bolts back there on the far wall where I mounted the control box. They're shiny silver, so we'll paint them black. And I'm going to wrap the 12-volt line in with some black cloth tape, and we'll fasten it. Probably fasten it to this wire loom. I think that made it blend right in with the other black wire loom. I'm going to do one final thing here to finish up the install. Cut this piece of rubber. This is going to go down at the firewall on the inside of the car. This rubber will go over the retainer on the bearing. And I'll just split this, cut it with a bandsaw so I can get it over the shaft, make it more of a finished look on the inside of the car. This is 5 inches across, and I used an 1 3/8 Forstner bit to cut the hole in the center. And while that wasn't necessary, I think it just gives it a more finished look. Now for a couple of closing comments about the EPAs electric power steering. The most frustrating part for me was getting the motor up under the dash with that steering column all attached. I think it said it weighed 48 pounds. It felt like about 100 pounds. When you're trying to get it up under the dash and get those two nuts on that cradle that goes around the column put on, that's probably the hardest part that I experienced. Instructions were good. They step by step. The one thing I would probably do different, I think I would wait until I put it in the car, then clock the column at the right position, and then drill that hole in the bottom and put a little screw in that to hold it where it needs to be. As far as operation, it's working as advertised. I think from just a short time I've test drove it, I probably want to leave that potentiometer at about 50% out on the highway. And as far as parking, I turned the potentiometer to maximum assist, and it was really easy to turn the front wheels as you were parking. So it's working as advertised. Would I recommend it? Yes, I definitely would. It is a little more expensive than going with conventional power steering with a pump, hoses, and pulleys and all of that. But once you get this installed, you don't have to worry about any leaks. Hopefully it will last a long time. We won't have to do any maintenance or anything. So I hope you've enjoyed the video on installing the EPAs electric power steering on this 66 Mustang Fastback. See you next time. Well, we hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, how about giving us a like and subscribing to our channel? Thanks.